Hey everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman and welcome to 10 Foot Pole, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Y'all ready for this?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome to season 4, episode 16. I am super excited today to introduce our guests. So we have participants from the Queer Bible Study at the Jacksonville Campus Ministry. It's Lutheran and Episcopal, or are you more broad than that?
We have all sorts of people. So we have, there's 7 denominations that are kind of formally a part of our campus ministry, but
Nice.
We've got people who come from all sort of
interfaith.
Yeah, it's
interfaith. I love it. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, really great in our divine preference for diversity. So with us today, we have Pastor Sarah Locke, who is the campus pastor there, Sam Rakita, Annaliese Trammel, and Geo Peterson.
That's us.
Welcome.
Thank
I'm
you.
super excited to have you guys. Tell us a little bit about this really cool thing that you do down here. You do a weekly queer Bible study, correct?
Yeah. So the way that Queer Bible Study started was that right before COVID, I guess, we had a student who was really active in campus ministry, and he came to me one day and said, I really want to learn more about the Bible. I want to read the Bible more, but I am transgender, and I feel like a traditional Bible study is just not the thing for me. And I said, okay, well, let me think about it and we can figure something out. And so then I got together with him and said, what if we just did a Bible study that examines the Bible through a queer lens?
Yeah.
And we talk about how the stories relate to the queer experience. And so it started off with just he and I getting together at the LGBTQ Resource Center here at UNF. And we hung out every week and talked about the Bible and talked about different stories and how they related to people's queer experiences. And then it kind of grew from there. So it's been a number of years now. And now we have the LGBTQ Resource Center isn't here anymore. A lot of things have been dismantled. So we have our Bible study weekly in the library. And we have lots of students who kind of find our ministry through your Bible study.
Love that. So the College of Charleston Pride Center did in the Multicultural Center closed briefly. They took it all down off the website, the whole deal, and then kind of figure out how to secretly reform it so that it still exists, it's still doing things. But they're still trying to navigate how to do that without getting in too much trouble with the state, which I greatly appreciate this school taking the effort to do that.
Yeah.
But what happened is, so the state, when all the DEI stuff happened, the state asked all the state schools, how much money are you spending on DEI? And the College of Charleston didn't know that they were supposed to lie. And so they asked Clemson, they said 0. They asked MUSC, they said 0. They said, ask Carolina, they said 0. They asked College of Charleston, they said $400,000. And so that, then of course, then they tried to make College of Charleston an example and cut the funding and did the whole thing and kind of sent the school into a spiral. And they're still working on it, but they do have dedicated people that are okay, we made a mistake, but we're gonna slowly figure it out. And that's still a work in progress, but that's just me saying that I am somewhat proud of the school for trying to figure that out, for better or for worse.
Well, don't tell their secrets on your podcast, AJ.
I feel very confident no one from the state of South Carolina is listening to my podcast.
Well, you never know.
We could change that.
We could. Please don't. It's fine.
We just send it to
my local representatives. Yeah, please.
You need to check this podcast out.
The gay agenda.
The gay agenda. That's right.
Absolutely.
Our speaker that we had yesterday, Pastor Colby Martin, he says, I've been an ally for like 15 years and I am still waiting to get my copy of the gay agenda. And I was like,
No.
other than like being able to live authentically and eat tacos, that's about the agenda.
Yeah, tacos are vitally important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you need to be a premium member to get the actual physical copies.
Oh, okay, that's it. I
Once you
haven't.
pay the first
You pay your dues.
pay the
Yeah.
first dues, we send it to you in the mail. So
Oh, okay.
tell them.
All
So
right.
if you already are queer, does that just count as lifetime dues?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
We've paid enough.
Is there like a website link?
I'll get you in the Discord. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What's that?
Sam's in the hardcore know of how we get a hold of
Yeah.
this actual
We're in the
agenda
inner
there.
circle.
There we go.
Sam's the
Mhm.
one to talk to, apparently.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So, on our recent travels to Greece and Turkey, doing the footsteps of Paul, Pastor Sarah and I had a conversation where she talked about that she's like, my queer Bible study folks think that Paul is the queerest person in the Bible, and I was like, oh, that is a fascinating perspective. And so we kind of made plans to see, all right, let's get the queer Bible study folks on here and let's talk about this. So help me out here. Where are we starting from? Where do we sort of unpack Paul, who he is, and how he kind of fits in as a somewhat queer icon in the Bible?
Yeah, so full disclaimer, we have like a Paul sympathizer, and then we have like someone who's like coming around to Paul. I'll let them self-identify. And then we have like someone who's like just sort of like okay with Paul.
Okay.
And so, I mean, we have kind of the breadth here, and I wanted like all of the perspectives around Paul.
I love that. I want to hear him. I come in as a person who's like not usually Paul's biggest fan. And that's only because like a lot of what seems to be like crap that gets spewed is coming out of Paul. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to listen to Jesus.
Right.
In defense of my take on Paul, I'm not the maddest at him. I'm more so mad at how modern day Christians treat Paul and prioritizing his words over the words of the literal Messiah sometimes. Like, I do not worship Paul. I don't have a crucifix with Paul on it. Like,
Sure.
I could get you one made.
Yeah.
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 Wait, how did Paul die?
All right. So tell me about it. Tell me our Paul perspectives.
I'm more so like, which side of the spectrum do you want to start with?
You can start wherever you want.
I'm the Paul sympathizer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell me. Let's start there then.
I love Paul largely because I really relate to him in like almost everywhere. Everything we've talked about, and everyone's like, this blah 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 Paul, and he's like pretentious and he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's doing it anyways. And I'm like, that's I think that's who I am in this story. And I also there's also a level of nostalgia with like the very specific faith tradition I grew up in. We did like a lot of studies on his letters. And yeah, I really like him.
So what about Paul's work really draws you in?
Well, like from the queer perspective, because like I feel like I think it's me that has brought up Paul enough times that now we're doing this study.
Yeah.
I definitely view him as like asexual or aro ace, and as someone who is ace and has been like,
you're gonna have to explain aro ace.
Okay, yeah, so like asexual is like a lack of sexual attraction, and aromantic is a lack of romantic attraction. And so I feel like there's an argument that can be made that he's either one or both of those things.
Okay.
Especially with his whole like, if you don't have to get married, then don't, because it's useless and it's a distraction and it's not worth your time. That reads as very like, this isn't something he needs or wants. And I really relate to that. And it's something when I came out to my mother as ace, and I was like, and Paul, you love Paul. You love Paul. I mean, he's probably ace, and I'm the same, and it's fine.
Yeah, I definitely think you get Paul is pretty against sex altogether.
That's true.
Like it seems like the idea of sex just repulses him. He's like, just don't do it. You know, like don't do it.
I relate to in my bones. So like I appreciate that.
I love the take of like, oh, Paul said this because he didn't have the experience of sexual attraction, and so him it didn't seem like a big deal. When I read his passages, sometimes I get the vibe of like, and like one of those ex-gay people who's like, yeah, and I had to like push all this down and like see it was so dirty and wrong and not of me, it was of the devil. Like
Oh,
it
interesting.
very reminds me of someone who is lying to themselves. So I like it better, your take of like he just didn't feel these things and did not get it, and that's why he could not
It's like that's gross. Stop doing
sympathize
that.
with it.
Yeah.
Right?
See, it's funny you mentioned that because like I'm on the opposite side of it, where like I always viewed Paul as like someone who starts off as like super homophobic or super antagonistic, because they're a closeted queer person,
Mm.
and then has his like coming out moment,
Same.
and everything, and then like so I always viewed Paul as kind of like that, yeah, like either antagonistic, closeted person who then like I think exemplifies the trans experience in the sense of like the reformation of his identity, his name change, and just like how he still kept his like we talk about this in queer Bible study, how like his core values and tenets stayed the same. Like he stayed pretentious and a know-it-all and whatnot, but then he was just like, I'm now a know-it-all for this side. And it just happened to be the side of everyone being like, what if you just, cared about people and that'd be it, and versus just being like, let's just kill these people.
He
Like,
went off though with the fruits of the spirit, like,
mhm.
and also that's such a great pun, like the fruits of the spirit. That's what came out.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of stuff that we do and talk about in queer Bible study is like metaphor. Like for the most part, we don't I like to emphasize this because for the most part, we don't just like flip through the Bible and be like, what if Moses was gay? And so like for the most part, it's kind of just like reading through a queer lens. But in this case, like it is kind of like this idea of what if Paul was dealing with something more in terms of his sexuality and his attraction, than just like going through this transformation of being Jewish and then kind of becoming transforming into a Christian and this zealot. And so it is a little bit like divergent from how we usually do Bible study, but at the same time, I think it's really fun to kind of do it differently in that way.
Well, I think it gives you also like an opportunity to dive deeper into like who these characters are, who these people were, and like what's going on in their lives. And I think that like gives it as much deeper meaning to a lot of it, including all of the things that Paul says. Like, where is he? Like, where is he coming from in this?
Yeah.
And just to sort of like get into those metaphors that we were talking about, the idea of like I have a thorn in my side that I have asked God to remove, like that is so
Closeted
indicative
person.
of
Yeah.
experience.
And I think it fits with each one of our interpretations of like your like in your perspective, it's like I being gay is this thorn, then take it away. It'd be so much easier. I've known so many people who are like, I wish this wasn't a part of me. It fits with mine of like I wish I could connect with people in a way that everyone else does. It feels like I'm missing something. Like I have felt like that. And then the whole like trans experience of like I wish I was in the right body. I wish I had the like people perceived me the way I ought to be perceived.
Wishing a part of you was removed.
Yeah.
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 Uh,
And like and the next verse is like Paul saying but like, well, and then the Lord responded to me and said, my grace is sufficient for you. And basically saying, like, there is nothing wrong with you. Like, I have created you the way that I have created you. And, like, you're just going to have to figure out how to be okay with who you are.
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think I figured we were gonna bring it up, so I'm gonna just bring it up. My favorite metaphor that we've done is the fact that him and Peter are now intrinsically linked via the Catholic Church.
Yes.
It's like I also didn't grow up in a very like ultra practicing version. I grew up in like Church of Christ, same with you, and so like learning all the different versions of Christianity has been so much fun over the
Yeah.
last like couple of months because it's just like, oh, you guys think this and believe that, like that's wild. So the fact that the church, intrinsically links these
Yeah.
two like superstars of the Bible,
Yeah.
is I feel like it's very like they give off the old gay vibes.
Yeah.
Those elder gays who, they fought and everything. They're like, oh, we're tired, but like they're still gonna be a little catty.
I think that's part of my resistance to Paul. Is sometimes he does remind me of like an old gay who's like, well, I've gotten my rights.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well,
It's like
what
7-year-old
about
still
the
has
rest of
he's
us?
married a husband. It's like-
Oh yeah.
I feel like that's how Paul is, and then Peter's like the one that's still
He's
outspoken.
like a rich elderly gay in
Yeah.
Greenwich Village who has like a
That's I can see that.
I love how specific that is.
I see that. I can visualize that.
I both want to hear his experience of like what was that like in the 70s, but also I'm like, we're not still in the 70s.
Sure.
Take
Yeah.
it, please.
Yeah.
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 I like joining Peter onto that, which is funny because that's now what the Catholics
Yeah.
do too. Like
Right.
the fact that you can have someone that's on that one side of being like, I was the best at what I could do. I was the best of the best, and I fought my fight, and now I get to like relax. And I feel like Peter, his whole thing was like, because I always loved Peter. Peter was always my favorite apostle because he always was very headstrong and willing to take action when others weren't, which like I felt very tuned to. So then having them kind of be coupled, I think that's a great vibe.
Mhm.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, I had brought like the icon that we saw it in Greece.
Yeah.
And
Well, they're very close.
yeah, and their faces are just like touching one. I mean, they're so close to one another. And of course, like I'm taking pictures of all of these icons, and I brought the one icon and showed our students, and they were like, "But why? like were they roommates? Like what was happening?"
They were traveling.
And so
It's like Aunt Judith and her friend Martha, who have just been like living in a
Right.
house together upstate New York for
Yeah.
like
And
20 years.
matching suits.
Yeah, they
Uh-huh.
like never they never got married to anybody. They're just like best friends.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but there's like apparently this whole lore about the fact that everybody in the Catholic Church they needed Paul to be much more important and to have a higher status. And so in the Catholic Church they just kind of like linked up Peter, who is the rock, who is like considered the first pope, and the like this rock of the church, the start of the Catholic Church, and they linked Paul. And they were like, yeah, they were people who traveled together and did all of the things together. And like what happens now is that they just look super gay together.
Yeah.
Which is I mean delightful. But now like it feels canon, right? Like
Yeah. Wait, so I gotta ask because
yeah.
I'm still learning this stuff. So did Paul and Peter ever travel together? I thought they didn't.
No.
They never interacted.
No,
They interact,
they
but they
did.
don't
Yeah,
travel together.
they did interact, and like in theory, they probably had like letters
Right,
that
yeah,
were
that would
like
make sense.
between
Paul
one
loved his
another.
letters.
Paul loved his
Yeah.
letters.
But like they were not travel buddies in the same way that
They would
like
just kind of
Paul.
go to the convention in the shared space.
Yeah, they were not.
In Orlando.
Yeah.
Orlando.
Paul didn't like have Peter come travel with him in the same way that like Barnabas did
Right.
and like all of that.
See, yeah, whenever I think of Paul, I'm always thinking of like Barnabas and what's his Timothy.
Timothy.
I always say I always say Timothy or Thomas. I always think of those two, but then I always like to think of, in this case, now we're discussing it, of Paul and Peter just like classic enemies to lovers. Like if like, they actually got to like hang out with each other, because the fact we don't know, like we just know that they probably saw each other at the convention and they wrote letters to each other.
Well,
Yeah.
I do know that Paul was like, Peter, can you like you're like get what does he do? He Peter's not Peter's making people follow like Jewish traditions, and Paul's like, can you cut that out? Like that's
Yeah.
not what we're doing anymore.
Yeah,
So they did have like
they have tension.
fight, but like at least tension.
Yeah.
I feel like I would have loved to. I want to see like a little AU where it's just Paul and Peter, like, but it's them doing a travel like series together.
love that.
You could
Because
start writing Bible fan fiction.
yeah, I'll
Yeah.
start writing Bible fan fiction because like one, I feel like that'd
I
be
think we
interesting
need
because they have such different philosophies in terms of like what it means to like be a Christian and be a disciple. And like and then with Peter always being like Peter was the aggressive one and the one wanting to like no, we need to like thrust Christianity into the faces of people. And Paul was kind of like, what if they just kind of
Peter's the top, is what you're saying.
yes,
Can I say that?
Peter's definitely a top.
Oh my God.
I feel like Paul's a switch.
Oh my
Oh
God.
God, we gotta move
All right.
on. We gotta move on.
Like maybe
Let's talk about some theology. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
not
theologically,
that this is not a fun train to be on, I'm all for it. Let's talk about some theology. Like, where in particular parts of Scripture do you look to kind of sort of identify either Peter or Paul or both into some of these areas?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked a lot about was this idea of Paul's, like, what a lot of people call transformation, but we talked about, or a lot of people call it Paul's conversion, and we talked about it in terms of Paul's transformation. And we talked about the difference in like the language specifically, that transformation is a more positive connotation in a lot of ways, and that conversion, I think we said that I think did you bring it up,
I
Sam?
think it was maybe
That
Danny.
yeah, that like conversion is something that like
Happens to you.
yeah,
yeah,
that was Danny.
yeah, conversion is done to you, and that like there's a really negative connotation in terms of like the LGBTQ community.
Conversion therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this idea that um Paul didn't, because like it's not just a change in language, right? Like it kind of changes the experience of Paul. Because Paul didn't convert to Christianity. Conversion like implies that he like did a 180 and denied everything about his Jewishness. Which is not true. He
Yeah.
really like believed that Christianity, his identity in Christianity was born out of him being the best darn Jewish person who's ever lived. Just ask him. He'll write you letters about it.
Tell you.
And so um and so like that, I think we talked a lot about just like how much that is identified in terms of the trans experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the idea of part of Paul's transformation of him seeing the like blinding vision of Christ and sort of not being able to deny it anymore kind of speaks to the shift a lot of people have of I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Something happens, all of a sudden you cannot lie to yourself anymore.
Yeah.
You see yourself through this different lens, and it's impossible to go back to the way you were living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That experience.
Yeah.
Even not in a like, oh, I'm queer, like in a like, oh, it's like something hit me and I'm like, I can't pretend like this isn't true anymore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here, because I was just like scrolling through my Bible app and stuff, and I love this intro to Philemon 1:1, and it just opens with Paul, a prisoner of Christ Jesus, and Timothy, our brother, to our beloved co-worker. And like I guess like the opening of one of his letters. But I love the fact that he's like called a prisoner of Jesus, and the fact being that like he is so like entrapped in like what he believes to be true that like there is no escape for him. Like this is truly what he is. But then also it doubles down into like we talk about the transformation versus conversion of like being a prisoner to your former self and now being prisoner to like your new self. But like that term prisoner doesn't have to have a negative connotation in the sense of being like prisoner, just being like you are fully enthralled and entrapped in like this now better or new version of you versus this older version of you.
Yeah.
I feel like they weigh differently. It's like
Yeah.
Paul was a prisoner to his
It's
old self.
that's a very like Lutheran understanding. Like
You say so, you know.
I mean, I will like let me throw down some Lutheranism for you.
Yeah.
Like Luther would talk about being like no longer being slave to the law, but being slave to your neighbor, and how like important it is to be a slave to your neighbor. Like
Yeah.
you should be going out of your way to be serving your neighbor.
Yeah.
No, I like
And that's not like an oppressive thing. That's a freedom. Like it is freedom
Yeah,
that
what
you
says
get
further
to
down
do.
too, like it goes right hand in hand with that, where he literally says that Paul says it's better to give than to receive. So then
Yeah.
it's in that same context, and I think
Yeah.
that like kind of fully encapsulates like who Paul became.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and there's even like this moment after Paul's transformation where he's still not able to see. And then he's told to like go into this town and find these people. And it's like in the community, and like in our metaphor, we would say like it's in the queer community because he goes to the Christians.
Mhm.
And the Christians are like, "Are you sure, God? Like
Has
this is the guy
yeah,
you want us to heal?"
closeted
Like,
guy has gay thoughts, stumbles into gay bar.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So that's the progression.
yeah. And they were like, yeah, because like he goes and into this community, and they were like, "Really, God? Like he was just killing all of the Christians, and you really
Yeah.
want us to make sure that he's safe, and you want us to heal him from this blindness?" And they were like, "Yeah, but yeah, this is where we're at."
But then the fact that they did, I
Mhm.
think, speaks to the ability to forgive within the capacity of your experience of saying, like, maybe you have been our persecutor. We know we've been there. And being able to look with sympathy of your own experience. And that's a very, like, queer experience, I feel like.
Mm.
Yeah.
Having to always make room for
Yeah.
folks to be able to have that transformation.
Yeah.
I feel like that happens a lot in the queer space, especially in like now modern day, where like there's queer people that also don't like other queer
Yeah.
people, and like there's tension and stuff. So it's like having to like have that give and take of being like, okay, we're supposed to be building this connected community, but like you're not doing it right. And I feel like that is perfectly mirrored with Christianity of like how we get all the different schisms and stuff.
And that's always sort of been a thing of, like, if you look back at what was happening during the AIDS crisis, a lot of, because I always have to bring it back to that.
I love it.
The community organizers were not in agreement with each other, and there was a lot of schisms and fightings and in groups about, like, well, you're not doing this right, we should be doing it like this, we should be doing it like that, why are these people being heard and these people not? And that's denominationalism,
Mhm.
like, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the idea that like, especially with like Christians, is we're not ever gonna like see eye to eye, right? And so like you're right, like having that also function inside the queer community too is a real and present thing that's happening.
And being able to say, like, I disagree with you and I still think you are a child of God.
Yeah.
And I disagree with you and I still respect your pronouns. Like, I
Mhm.
do not degrade you as a human just because I do not think you are correct.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think of it too in terms of like folks who have been sort of brought into this like Trump cult and this like Christian nationalism cult. And I struggle a lot with like feeling um resentment and like truthfully downright rage. But also trying to balance that with like the idea that when there are people who have said, you know what, it's gone too far, I can't
Mm-hmm.
support this anymore, going, wonderful. I'm so glad that you have like realized that. Please come and help us and like and be a part of this community, and we can like work towards a better place. And like it's really hard to want those people to be a part of the community and not be like, what the hell took you so long? Like, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I think of that too, of like, man, I want to be more graceful in those moments when those things happen. And um, it's not easy.
And that goes back to Paul of, like, what the hell took him so long to
Yeah.
stop being a persecutor? But
Yeah.
he did, and he learned and grew.
Yeah.
And that's why we have so much of the New Testament.
Yeah. Oh, lucky us. Right.
Paul just couldn't stop writing about it.
Yeah.
That's another reason why I relate to him
And
so much.
yeah, okay, this is my like just thing about Paul that I think about all the time. Why did we take someone else's mail, read it, and obey it? Like, it's just a little strange to me. We
Yeah.
got
Archaeology
someone's
is so
letter
weird when you
to
break it down.
someone else, and we're like, this is going in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time on the podcast. Anytime we dive into the epistles, we say, remember, we are reading someone else's mail.
Yeah.
So most of the time, someone wrote a letter to Paul asking questions or laying out a scenario, something that needed help with. And all we get is the response to that. We don't actually know what they said, like what Paul is responding to. So to then turn around and use Paul's words as, quote, law, it doesn't actually make any theological sense for us to do that, right? That we should learn from what was going on in these communities that Paul is writing to and visiting and helping these churches get their feet under them, and going through their divisions. And we should experience the letters of Paul as sort of helpful tips and guides for like when our communities are struggling with those things.
Something that Father Wiley likes to say is that the Bible is painted with the palette of the historical context it was written in. And I feel like when we only have one half of this letter exchange, like the part of the toner on the printer is missing.
Yeah.
And so we have to go into it knowing like some of this historical context we are not getting.
Yeah. That's true. And that too, like, I mean, we've had some interesting interactions on campus in these past couple of weeks. We hang out on Wednesdays during like market days, which is where people table on campus, and they have clubs and they have organizations and they have
Every Wednesday, wow.
yeah, every Wednesday. And so these last couple of Wednesdays, we've had some folks who have wanted to talk, they say genuinely, about how we can be a Christian community and be affirming and celebrating of the LGBTQ community. And of course, they like want to quote Leviticus, and then they want to go on to Paul. And my thing is just like, if homosexuality was that important to Paul, like if it was something that was keeping him up at night in every community that he was visiting, why wouldn't he have written about it in more than like 2 letters?
And also, he didn't even write very clearly about it in those 2 letters, to the point where we're like, was he saying that?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. We're
soft men.
Yeah, he was like making up Greek words to try
Yep.
to like he was definitely not being clear about what he was talking about. And so yeah, that whole like reading other people's mail thing, and even like this idea that, you know, women be silent, and it's like, if that was something that we were supposed to take as like universal law, perhaps Paul would have written it more than just one time.
And why would he still be like sending out Lydia to do things, or like literally there's a woman in charge of a whole church community that he addresses?
Yeah. It's a very strange interpretation of very specific Bible verses that people get really caught up with to sort of proof text their own understandings of the world, which I just don't think is super helpful in general, and specifically with those topics.
Yeah. I'll say Pastor Colby last night said something really good about it's part of the letter in Romans, I think it's like 15 and 16, where he talks about this idea about whether or not it's okay to like eat the meat, right, that was sacrificed on the altar of one of the Greek or Roman gods, right? And Paul's like, it's okay. And he does this comparison of where he talks about either weak faith or strong faith. If a person is a quote like weak faith, that they still for their faith like feel like they can't eat that meat, that we need to make some space for them. And then on the other side, those of you with, quote, strong faith that like, you know that your salvation and your relationship with Jesus and what it means to be a follower of the way has nothing to do with that whatsoever. That like good, like that's quote right or where Paul is leading, guiding people towards. But to say that those that are still in that other space to make space for them. And I really like that of sort of like thinking about folks that are still incredibly homophobic, right? Like how, like we know that we are loved and beloved children of God, no matter what any of those people think or think that like these laws should be applied this way, that, or another. But to still make space that like they're not there yet, that they still feel like in order to be a good Christian, they can't eat the meat.
Mhm. Yeah.
That to me is a very illuminating way of thinking and processing some of Paul's theology about what it means to be a Christian and what does practicing that mean.
Or on the other hand, when there are queer people of faith who are trying to learn and accept that they are still God's children, um, making room for their experience of guilt and
Yeah.
not saying like, well, that's silly that you believe that. That's antiquated. Saying, I understand why you feel this. I understand that you feel this. I understand that there's room for you to feel this. And also there is room for so much more.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I felt coming to queer Bible studies. It made me so uncomfortable every single week. But I was like, but this is the good uncomfortable that I need to learn how to deal with. And I'm fine. This is great. I love this.
You're in the Roman barbecue with us now.
Yeah. The Roman barbecue.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about some of the specifics that you guys have talked about lately in some of Paul's letters and how those apply to sort of the queer community.
Yeah, we talked pretty extensively last week, or this week, I don't know when it was. This week about the thorn in Paul's flesh. We talked a lot about this word that he uses about being conceited, because he says that there's the reason that he has this thorn in his flesh is so that he isn't so conceited. Apparently, he thinks very well of himself in most other ways, but God has given him a thorn so that he couldn't be, too proud. And so we looked at like the different translations and things, and that word can be, gosh, what were some of them? Proud, conceited. Um, I have to think of what some of those other words were.
On your high horse.
Yeah.
He's just trying to stay humble.
Yeah. He's like trying to stay humble and he's like humble bragging about it almost. But then I looked at the King James Version translation of it, and it was actually like all of the other words were about him thinking of himself and being proud of himself. And the King James Version actually translated it something about so that other people can't exalt me. And I thought that that was kind of interesting that it was the reverse, and that like it was so that other people couldn't look at him as higher than he was, as if they would think about that.
Well, that I think feels necessary, right? As we've talked about in this conversation of like people putting Paul up there on sort of the same level as Jesus.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. That is literally what I was exactly about to say.
Yeah. But also thinking about like what are our thorns, right? What are the thorns in our flesh of like what are the things that keep us humble when we think highly of ourselves? And there was another trying to think of the other conversations we've had about Paul.
You kind of brought back from your trip the context with which Paul was speaking from within. So like the limbs.
Mm-hmm.
And that I appreciated because I think it also speaks to the queer experience of sometimes you'll hear someone say something historically and they'll say like, "Oh gosh, that's a yikes," and then you look back at the context that they were speaking from and you say like, "Oh, that was actually extremely progressive and lovely and affirming for the context that they were within."
Yeah. So what Sam's referring to is while you're in I Greece and Turkey all blur together
Mm-hmm.
for me. But we went to one of the archaeological sites and they discovered that there was a temple. Do you remember which god it was that had
Oh, Sheplis?
no, the healing god?
Yeah, Sheplis.
Was that? Oh, okay. Well, obviously I just don't know how to say the name. Um, and so like people in return for healing, they would like sculpt the body part that the god healed. And so when they were doing the archaeological dig, they discovered that there were just like pottery and like sculptures of all of these different body parts. And so Paul would have like walked around this town and found that there was this temple that these people were worshiping this god and giving these body parts. And that's where this sort of context around the idea of there are many parts but one body, and like we are all a part of one body, which like I've heard used in like a very like ableist way in the past. And like the body is only good if you have all of your body parts. And I'm like, whoa, yikes. But like Paul had this sort of like context and he had this sort of like understanding of what was happening in that city. Um, and he used that to write a letter to these folks and say, I know that this is normal for you, and we can't just value one part of our body. Um,
So yeah, like I wasn't here for that one, but like hearing about y'all talking about it, see, I'm thinking of a different case where like it makes me think of it kind of backfired with the whole Catholic Church stuff, but like we said, Paul trying to like show himself as being like, don't exalt me.
mhm.
I am still kind of just like you, but I kind of think of it as like a um oh God, this is such a nerdy line, but from Batman v Superman, where Batman asks Superman, "Do you bleed?" But it's in that context also, like in her scorecard, like, "Do God if can you make God bleed?" And like that's a really cool
Mm.
line from there's their book about the Battle of Thermopylae with like the 300, and one of the lines is from the Spartans saying that like today I will not kneel, but I will make a god bleed. And
Mm.
like it's such a great line and I love it. But it's like I kind of look at it like that thorn and all that stuff as Paul just keeping a cut on his arm or like blood flowing to show that he's not above. To me, like I am
Mm.
on your level. I'm a leader and all that stuff, but like I'm still bleeding.
Yeah.
I still have issues. I still have
Mhm.
problems. And like obviously in like plus 200 2000 years it like backfires just because of like circumstance of being like, well, hey, what if we make this guy
Yeah.
our big guy? But like I think it is interesting like in the then context, like you were saying, like him walking around and him being like, I could definitely see that as like people trying to like, because he's the head, one of the head guys for like that back half of the New Testament traveling. So like I could definitely understand how they would have like seen him as maybe like a secondary Jesus in that sense. And
Mhm.
so him having to be like, no, 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 I'm just a guy still. No matter how proud he is.
Yeah.
One of the scriptural things that sort of speaks to me clearly is the fact that Paul was imprisoned so often for what he was doing, and that sort of as a civil disobedience and a bravery of I believe in what I am standing for so much that I will go to prison for it. And
Mhm.
that as a queer person, um, and the understanding that the law isn't always on our side.
Mhm.
and that sometimes to violate the law is a just thing.
Yeah. And gosh, I don't remember what letter it was, but or maybe it was Acts. I think you looked it up that he goes and he talks to Barnabas, and Barnabas travels with him quite a bit, but then Barnabas wants to like have another person join in their travels, and Paul was like, no. He was not fervent enough in his preaching, and he was not like a good enough disciple. So we really don't want him to join in our like preaching circuit. And I'm thinking of like this idea that like you have to, or like Paul's idea that you have to be willing to risk all of it in order to like be a part of his community, to be a part of his like people who are traveling around and doing it.
And it reminds me of when a gay person will say like, well, I'm not going to back trans rights because that makes me less respectable to the oppressive class. And not siding with your own people because it allows you a little bit more privilege.
Yeah.
And Paul saying, no, I put my foot down to that. It's all of us or it's none of us.
Yeah.
We're talking about it in sociological theory with Marx. But I won't spend 30 minutes talking about Marxist theory.
Why not?
Because we're talking about Paul.
That's the after.
That's for when we leave and I go, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking too of, I think this was like one of the very first conversations we had about Paul and how like just kind of bonkers it is that all of these churches were writing letters to Paul, who was like a baby Christian.
Yeah.
And I think Sam, you like pointed out that like you also were a baby Christian, and like what if you just like went around and starting churches all around?
I should not be responsible for anyone's soul.
Yeah, it's just like,
Paul.
what if like a bunch of churches just started like writing letters to Sam and being like, hey, we're having this problem in our congregation. What do you think that we should do? And Sam was like, I've got it.
Yeah, no one should listen to me as a church leader.
Well, I think that's also the fact being that like you're not an egoist. Like Paul, without a doubt, is an egoist in the sense of being like
He's like, oh, I got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also like he could self back it up because he was like, I am super educated. I know all these languages. I am so popular among like Jews and Romans
Right.
and Greeks. So for him to just be like, yeah, now I look at him as like a star footballer who gets just transferred to another team, where like his job is to work for whoever his team is, to score goals,
It's
to do things.
It's giving celebrity who gets into politics for
Yeah,
me.
no, yeah. So I feel like I like the sports analogy better because like it's like being like no, if God's my now, he's my now boss for this team. Like my job is to score goals, make this team look good, and like he did that for years for the Jews and for the Romans and stuff. And so now that he's like, okay, he got traded, and now he's being like, okay, guess what? I know I'm good enough because I can back it up because look how well I did at like you wanna yell at me for persecuting, like, oh no, he persecuted us, but like I think that Paul like he kind of manipulates it and flips it, being like
he does.
where the sense being like instead of him being like, oh, I'm sorry, it's like no, look how good I persecuted you. Aren't you glad I'm now on your team? Because guess what?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so
That's exactly, he says that like
Yeah.
in his letters. He's like, I was the best Jew.
Right. So I think like if like Sam, like, having that same mentality, like, no, I am a baby Christian. I don't need to be in charge of stuff. But like that's good because like you don't have that egoist mentality. But I think it is so specific for Paul, like being an egoist and everything.
Also, everyone was a baby Christian. And
Yeah.
someone
Fair
had
enough.
to do something.
Someone had to be the most senior baby.
Someone
But like
had
I feel like Peter would have been the most senior baby at that point.
But like,
Or like any of the 12 should have been.
Oh,
Like
they were dying very quickly.
they were dying very quickly, but like
John was still kicking.
John was still kicking. I feel like
He went to old age.
John got to old age, so I feel like John should have been the Paul low key.
clearly Paul had the skills
Maybe
to
he did.
utilize. I don't know.
I
I
think,
like,
well, no, it's like also like Paul rolled like a nat 20 on charisma,
That's true.
where like he was like, oh no, I'm new, but here, listen to what I gotta say. Versus like I feel like John, he was like, I have experience. Like I feel like John gets overlooked a lot of times
Yeah.
because I feel like John had a lot more of a like nicer demeanor, which is great and good for the work that he did and the stuff he talked about. But I feel like John, like I could definitely envision of like them in a little conversation of all of them being like, we need someone to go out and start building stuff, and like John could be like, I've been with Jesus for a while, and but then like Paul spoke up louder. It's like I could do it,
Maybe,
and everyone's like, let's do this guy,
Yeah.
and just John's like, okay.
maybe that's my beef with Paul. Like, I'm just angry on the behalf of John because I'm like,
Yeah.
he's got so shortchanged.
Yeah. And John's your guy, right?
He's my guy.
Yeah, John's your guy. So I was,
Dude.
Yeah.
I mean, other than Jesus.
I mean, but we get a little bit of all of them. And I think so, again, this divine preference for diversity, right? That we have a little bit of all of their sprinkling in there to say that, like, John was good for these people. Paul is really the firm hand they needed over here. Peter was the good guy over here, right? That, like, everyone needed a little bit of something from some different perspective.
yeah.
But I think too, like, I mean, the church today, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say today. I have no idea how the church works today. But when I was going through seminary, there was this kind of like inventory that they did, and they tried to like determine whether or not you were going to be like an apostle or a disciple or a teacher or a preacher, or I don't know. They had all these different categories. And basically like the disciple, I think it was disciple, was like the church planter. And they just like went into communities and just like messed stuff up and just like created churches, and then they would leave. They were like the Pauls
Yeah.
of the places. And they just like went in and just like did the really hard work and did the stuff of creation, and then they just like pieced out. And
Someone else like checks in.
yeah, and then he like put somebody else in place that could like be the pastor and like nurture people and walk through life with them and like stuff like that. And I think like in that way, he was probably best fit for the work that he was doing, because he was putting those people in place that were able to then communicate with him and have those conversations about like what those communities needed. And I do see like that kind of reflection in you and Paul. Like, Annaliese, like you would be very good at like going into a community being like, hey guys, we're gonna do it like this, and also I need you to go ahead and lead this for the rest of time, and then I'm gonna peace out and go do this somewhere else.
He's very project manager.
Yeah.
He's a stage manager.
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, relating it back to sociology, it's very macro versus micro.
Mhm.
He's very like, and we have to organize all of this, but I need people to organize individually.
Mhm.
Um,
And they did like send him letters and ask him obviously specific questions about the problems that they were having. And he was very long-winded and decided to write them entire books in response.
I see no issue with this.
Right.
Major.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long-winded letters to
I don't know.
people.
That's
So
why
also,
you're
this gives me like it gets the same vibe of like, instead of emailing your supervisor, you email the CEO.
Oh,
Or
yes.
we'll say the COO. 'Cause
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
you guys
Yeah.
Jesus is the CEO.
Yeah.
But like it's like message. It's sending an email directly to the COO. Be like, hi, we're having a problem like on the front line. What do you want us to do? And then him being like, technically, it's my job to respond.
Mhm.
So it's like, here's this like really long-winded answer. But in the case of being like getting all technical,
Mhm.
but like I feel like it's someone's mind. I would love to think that in someone's mind who like after getting a letter and they're like reading all this, they're like, why didn't you just write this dude whose
Yeah.
like specific job is to handle local problems, and like
Right.
like this guy doesn't know what's happening in our town
Yeah.
because he's traveling. And I think it's like on that same thing with like how we think of like how hierarchy and like businesses get so far removed. Like if you're on that upper level, you don't know how the world's operating on like the base level. It's why you have supervisors and all that stuff. And so I do think it's kind of funny that like they saw a problem and they're like, we're gonna go straight as high as I can go.
Yeah.
Which to me that just sounds so
the
stupid and
guy-
blasphemous, but like this is like
Yeah.
OG the originating of Karen behavior where
Yeah.
it's like I'm gonna go straight to the manager.
Yeah.
I have a problem, and they're like,
Yeah.
I have a supervisor. Like, no.
Yeah. But also like then they then he like writes a letter back and gives it to like the manager
Yeah.
and is like, all right, here, this is what the manager needs to know. And the manager's like, wait, who wrote a letter to you?
Yeah, like it's getting
Yeah.
you're getting short-sighted. You're like,
what's
you guys have
happening?
problems?
Yeah, what's happening
This is
here?
why I'm here.
I love that.
You know what Paul's letters sort of remind me of is when you have like a really crazy sounding rule, like do not microwave the Pop-Tart in the wrapper. And you're like, okay, something, they're not just telling us this for no reason.
Right, this happened.
Someone did that. Like his
Yeah.
letters are directed towards something. Like
Yeah.
someone did something to get this rule written down.
Yeah. And I feel like it's sort of like the someone, it's just like it was that one person. I feel like
Yeah.
it's like people, like enough people are having issues, right? And it's that one person who took it upon themselves, like, I'm gonna email the boss. Everyone's gonna love me for this. And
Yeah.
they're like being like blah blah
And
blah.
now we're having a podcast.
Right.
about
And
it.
then Paul was being like, you guys are doing this, but instead of it's like you guys, it's like it's really this person who decided
Yeah.
to write the letter.
Yeah.
Or like these few people decided to write the letter, and Paul's
Yeah.
being like, yeah, don't do this. That's stupid. Actually, here, you know what? We're just gonna send out a company-wide memo
Yeah.
so
Yes.
everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
Don't do this.
Company-wide
And then like
memo.
imagine if you're I feel like I think about the people that were like just kind of chill. They're doing their vibe. They're being like, why like getting called in like on a Friday? You're like, why are we having a meeting, a morning meeting about this? And
Yeah.
like you hear about it, you're like, who wrote Paul?
Yeah.
Who cooked spaghetti in the bathroom?
Right?
Yeah. That's-
Like I could definitely see myself being like that, like just sitting back at a church meeting and the pastor just being like, all right, guys, Paul sent us a letter for me to read to you guys. And they're like, oh great, that's awesome. And then you read it and someone being like, who wrote Paul? Who said all of this stuff? Like
I wonder if some of the specific that could be so fun. Like some of the specific things that were written, like for instance, women have to be silent. What if it was just like a grumpy guy?
right, that's what I'm saying. I feel like it feels like
Like-
first thing. Yeah,
so can I say, so when I was in college, one of the landlords that I had, that they owned like probably half of like the apartment buildings in the college town. And they had like the lease, right? And then there was like this extra addendum that was 158 of Basil's rules. And all of these rules were things like don't walk outside barefoot and then walk back into the apartment. And there were all these like little, like really little weird things. And you're like, what happened?
right.
That,
It's like,
and so like every incident that they had happened over like a 20, 30-year period, that's something that happened, they would like write another rule for it. And so like somehow I see like, you have your lease, right? So this is the Gospels. And then you got Paul's writing. So it's 158 of Basil's rules that just get added every time something little happens.
That
And-
sounds
and-
very pharisaical. Very like
What?
Say more.
Mhm.
we're gonna add more rules so that you don't break the real rules.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, they do that in Harry Potter too, right? I mean, are we
Yeah.
allowed to talk about Harry Potter on this podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, what's her face? Umbridge.
Mhm.
Like when she
Yeah,
started.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just like keeps going with all the rules. Like every time anybody does anything that she doesn't like, she just like keeps putting up another rule.
Mhm.
Which like I don't think that's like what Paul is intending, because to me it does not make sense for him. Like I think that Paul is full of himself enough that if he was intending to create rules that like were universal and that he wanted everybody to follow, he would address
Mhm.
the
Every-
universe, right?
Mhm.
Like, I just think he probably would have been like, dear the church in Corinth, and also everyone else who hears this
Dear
letter.
churches.
Yeah. And he doesn't do that. He like specifically addresses people and specifically addresses certain churches. And I think to me that says that these issues that people were having were incredibly contextual.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would not write a letter to, I don't know, a church in Colorado about the armadillo problem that we're having at Redeemer Episcopal Church in Jacksonville.
Wait, hold on. What?
We're having-
Armadillo problem?
There's an armadillo problem at our church.
Why don't we tell the people in Colorado about this?
Well, I'm just saying.
Or more so, it's like I feel like it's like
Okay.
contacting like the head of your diocese.
Yeah.
Like, hi, I am under your diocese,
Yeah.
and we have an armadillo problem in Jacksonville, Florida. And then be like, this is not what you call this number for.
Yeah. And so we wouldn't talk to the Colorado church about this issue. And it's the same thing with Paul's letters. We just we can't apply them to all of the things.
Mhm.
I'll tell you about the armadillo problem later.
Yeah, no,
I
I'm
promise.
reeling from that.
I promise.
Curious about the armadillo problem now, but
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you guys so much for diving into some, unpacking of Paul and the different perspectives and how we can read Paul and understand him and just kind of broadening that horizon a little bit. I really appreciate you guys sharing and taking the time to do that today. So thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys. This is fantastic. And everyone, just remember, we got more good stuff coming up here in the next few weeks, and then we will take a short break before we start our study of Revelation. So please stay with us. And as always, remember that you can learn more about the podcast at 10footballpodcast.com, as well as find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10football podcast and wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, please remember that the 10 Football Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care.